Hello, folks. Welcome to Totally Tanked, and Rob's going to do the rest of the intro.
Welcome to Totally Tanked, the Tankies podcast in Tankville. It's July 13th, 2024, and this is episode 60. I'm Rob, and I'm joined by...
Oh, I'm John, and welcome to the Tanktainment answer to Wayne's World. And what tank are we doing today? It's the stolen Spearpoint of the Blitzkrieg, the Czech designed and built Panzer 38T. T being the first letter of the way Germans spell Czech, which makes sense when you think about it, sort of Czech. Yeah. There's considerable debate online if this is an underrated tank, and it really depends on who you ask. Folks who really know their stuff are all across the accomplishments of this little tank, but most casual students of World War II will still be surprised that the key units of the German army in their most successful period weren't using German panzers.
See, I think the real issue is the use of the word underrated. Native English speakers understand the context and the nuance of the word, but when translated into foreign or seen by anyone with a better design language, i.e. everybody else, than English, they think of the literal meaning of the word underrated and miss the idea that it was the little tank that could, battling above its weight and performing against the odds. And I just want to give a quick shout out to all our folks on the online. So we got Etienne, there's a good joke in there, Alan and Antonio. Thanks for joining along. And a very long name from
Ramo. We'll just go with Ramo.
And Jute Seattle.
Mm-hmm.
Joe at Seattle. Hello all.
So just quickly, for people hearing us in the podcast version, we are doing this as a live stream. We're getting comments from the stream, and we will try and bring them into the show because often they add a lot of value. Not always, often. Just quickly before we move on, I've lost my train of thought. Okay, it's time to thank the patrons. So I just quickly need to...
John's got a new setup. It's really fancy. Look, you'll notice we've got these fancy little microphones sitting on our chest now.
It's not
if
that great.
If we had nice cleavage, it'd be even more attractive.
Okay, here come the patrons. No, I didn't put them in the thing properly.
We'll have to read them off.
Read them off they go. So we've just done the top tier patrons. We'll come back to them. The other tier, we've got Anton Gorbanov, Carter Heller, Christoph Keller, Dan Sapienza, David Mulvaney, Floaty Burb, Guy Hook, Hans Wang, Henry Hemmerd, Jay Beckman Strauss, Jamie Stokes, Late Apex, Major Mansfield, Scotch 12, and Steve Matthews, and Tony L, and Vikram Murthy. And now we'll better give a shout out to the top tier patrons as well. So there,
artisanal level patrons.
We have Brian Jenkins, Chris Pezet, Cornelius Weber, Ian McGuinness, Eugene, Jonathan A. Markle, Johnny Utz, who's joined us new, Maxi Mixed, and Pear.
Thank you all.
I just want to quickly note on that we are getting more ads in the podcast, and that's good because we are actually getting paid for them. And the patrons get an ad-free version of the episode. So if the ads are annoying you, it's only $3 a month. Up to you. Any contributions are gratefully appreciated. Now, I just need to get us back to the correct slideshow.
Oh, wait. John can get us more fun, cool kit that he gets to play with.
Okay, there we go. Look, it's Star Trek now. We've got little communicators on us delivering the sound. Jamie's joined us from Adelaide, which is great to see. Cool. Okay, Rob. Totally Tank T-shirts. Look at us, how magnificent we are. I'm in my Stug Life T-shirt. Rob's in his OG Big Cat Tiger shirt. And go to redbubble.com, search Totally Tanked. And you will find us, and that's really awesome. We appreciate it. Okay, Rob, take it away.
Right, time to get into the tank. Names. Oh, so many names. All right, so we'll start off with the Panzer 38T, which is what most people know it as. But it's also known as the Panzer 3T, the SKD-FZ-140, the LTM-38, Protectorate, the LTZ-VZ-38, short for... I'm not going to say it very well in Czech. Lecky Tank Vzor 38, the Light Tank Model 38, the LTM 38, the 60 TNHP, which is the export version to Iran, the 25 LTP, which was the export version to Peru, who then called them the tank with the Q38s, the Panzerwagen 39 in Switzerland, the LTL export version to Lithuania, but none were delivered due to the Soviet annexation in 1940.
Certain unpleasantness.
So
starting in 1939, but yeah.
So those were given to Slovakia as the LTVZ-40s. Sweden ordered 90 PZ Kampfwagen 38Ts Alfs S in 1940, but these were seized by Germany. In compensation, Germany allowed Sweden to build their own tanks under license as the Stridsvagn M41 and 43, and I'm sure there are some others I've missed.
I was fascinated to see the Iranians had their first tank purchase back in the pre-war period, and we'll get to the service of those.
Surrounded by major powers in England and Russia, and we've just discovered the use of oil, so they wanted to protect that, and guess what? It didn't work.
Look.
The Anglo-Russian Soviet invasion of Iran.
50 light tanks was not going to hold out the Soviet army, no. But that's not the fault of the light tanks.
All right, so they were produced from 1938 to 1942. The Nazis built, the Czechs built for the Nazis about 1,400 plus, 1414. They massed 9.5 tons. They're 15 foot long, 7 foot wide, and 7.5 foot high. Crews started with 3. So the Czechs are only going to have the one commander, gunner, and loader in the turret, and a driver and a radio operator and bow gunner operator in the hull. Which is
a design layout that we now know to not be a good one. But at the time, everyone was making the commander sat in the turret on his own, and he could look around and can't he pull the trigger and load the gun? Why not? Yes, it's wrong. It doesn't work. But when the Czechs did this, like all the British light tanks were doing it, the Renault FT had done it, the French were doing it. This was not an isolated or foolish approach, albeit that it turned out to have some shortcomings.
Yes. However, the Germans, the Nazis said that's not good enough for us, so we're going to take out some ammo and shove it out the fourth person into the turret to make them the loader. So the commander still had to.
Just want to quickly say, Brett Parker's joined us. Brett, really great to see you. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks for coming along. Armour. It started out with 15 mil of armour on the sides and the upper glasses, and 30 mil on the hull and the turret front. That was the Alf's A to D. Then doubled all the front armour. Double all the front and side armour to 30 and 50 mils. That was their models E to G. The main gun was the Czech 37 millimeter KWK 38.
KWK 38 is a German designation, and it does have T in it there.
But it was found to be better than the 37 mil gun that the Germans were using. So
German anti-tank guns of the early war period were unfortunate. It wasn't until they really settled on the 88 that they got their act together.
Yeah. Machine guns, it had two 7.92 ZB53s, which were also known as the base machine gun in British service. So exactly what the British were using.
Beza.
There you go. The engine was a Praga 6-cylinder gasoline, 125 horsepower with 5 forward gears, 1 reverse.
And let's remember, 125 horsepower is anemic, but in a 10-ton tank,
it was pretty good.
That's getting pretty good. That's very good for the era and not too bad today.
Christie type leaf suspension with 4 large road wheels, which made it very simple for it to look after it. Fuel capacity 220 litres. They tried a fuel trailer in Barbarossa, but quickly canned it.
We have got a picture in the slideshow. So for those enjoying the video feed, it'll come up in the slideshow soon. And for those on the audio, our social media will have the slideshow up shortly. So.
Yep. Operational range of about 200 kilometres on road and 150 kilometres cross country, which is not bad. Maximum speed 42 k's on road, 15 k's an hour off road. And development and design. The Czechs were one of the largest manufacturers, exporters during the interwar of weapons manufacturers and exporters during the interwar period. They came up with some good aspects of tank design in the 1930s with the LT 34 and 35, but they had when they came out with the LT 38, so they overcame a number of the drawbacks that the previous design versions had built into them. So they designed a very serviceable and reliable tank with excellent armour for the time. Just remember that point.
I do love Otto Carius's description of having his PZ-38T blown up around him, saying the armour did nothing.
Well, the armour stopped the rounds from coming through. It was the spalling inside from the brittle armour.
But that was taking around from a 76mm gun as well. It's just utterly overmatched by that sort of firepower.
So the armour, firepower, and mobility were excellent for the time. However, the Czech military, for some reason, didn't want to buy any, and so they went to the export market, selling export versions, export version of the LT-38 to Iran and Peru. This was before 38.
The Peruvian one we have got in the slideshow as well.
There you go. with other countries considering placing orders. Now, the fun one is, then the British and the French signed the Munich Agreement of 1938, giving away half the country over to the Nazis, and the Czechs weren't invited to give their thoughts on that process. That was a pretty dismal affair for diplomacy, I've got to say.
Look, Chamberlain rightly has gone down in history as a fool, and anything he does to be avoided.
Alan's saying our sound is not as loud as we could be.
Okay, all right, I will turn up the sound.
Is anybody else getting that one?
Just give me a sec. Okay.
As I said, John's got new toys, so...
How are we sounding now, Alan? Any better?
Hopefully
Let us know.
Yep.
We'll leave that where it is for now because I don't want to peek out too much. But let us know how we're going with that. I've got another button I can twiddle. There we go. Brilliant. Thank you, Alan. We do actually appreciate that sort of feedback.
Because what was it? One episode where we were speaking by ourselves for 5 minutes and realizing we were on silent. Anyway, so you have to be asking yourself, how are the Czechs feeling after the Munich Agreement? That's what I was talking about before that. Okay, so Chamberlain, reviled by history with good reason, died shortly after. But Chamberlain was fully aware of what was going on. He wasn't an idiot. He didn't think Hitler was going to stand by the peace. What he did know was where his own rearmament program was at and where France's rearmament program was at. And their view was that in 1938, they were going to be stronger in 1940 relative to where the Germans were in 38 to 40. So it was a calculated, cynical maneuver, not a, I'm a starry-eyed idiot who thinks the nice Mr. Hitler is going to stick by his word. So that's an important bit of context to remember. And then Churchill knew damn well what Chamberlain was doing and still went out and presented him as a starry-eyed idiot to seize power. So, because remember, Churchill was not elected into World War II. Anyway, let's move on from there. I just love the story about how Hitler just kept on talking during the meeting and talking, and all the Brits who were desperate for a cigarette just eventually just agreed to what was ever in front of them so they could go out, go have a cigarette break. All right, we've got a few more people joining us. Raghu, thank you very much. Jonathan Beckman and Computer Enthusiast number 10. There we go. Thanks for joining along. So, as I was saying, you've got to wonder how the Czechs were feeling after the Munich Agreement and what could have happened.
Very angry, betrayed. Let's build tanks for the Nazis then if you pricks don't want to help us out.
And what could have happened if they just shut down the tank factory? I'm sure the shareholders didn't care as long as they were making sales. There's points about capitalism at all costs in there type thing. Anyway, the Czechs had made...
Well, the Soviets came and sorted that out.
The Czechs had made 10 Panzer 38Ts with 150 on order when the Nazis invaded in March 1939. The Nazis were very happy with the design, but didn't like the medium STV Z39 that was on the design boards, and very quickly put the manufacturing output of the Czech factories back into use. So the factories were put back to work in early May of 1939, building 25 a month, whilst the German production of the Panzer 3s and 4s slowly grew in output. So basically, the Nazis were saying, look, we've got 1,000 Panzer 1s and 2s. We're slowly building up our stock of Panzer 3s and 4s, but they're not there yet. Having another factory that's going to churn out 25 of these decent tanks every month, that sounds pretty good to us. So, yeah, let's do it.
And let's remember that even after 1942, which was pretty much the last hurrah of this tank as a mainline tank, they still kept the production line going using the same chassis to make Hetzers, which were a very effective tank destroyer. And again, the issue that we keep coming back to is weight. This thing under 10 tons. There's a whole bunch of factory facilities that can handle a 10-ton object that can't handle a 40-ton object because of the cranes. As long as it was useful, and the Hetzer was useful right up until the bitter end, these factories were able to be churning out very viable fighting vehicles that didn't have the same industrial footprint as heavier ones.
So the Brits got one in February of 1939 for testing, and they said they didn't like it. They must have decided they liked the Crusader better, I guess.
I've got some theories on this.
Just don't ruin the idea that they liked the Crusader better. So
no, but I mean, British doctrine at the time was built around the 2-pounder gun as their tank gun, which was an effective anti-tank weapon, largely ineffective for anything else, but for anti-tank effective against the tanks of the period, and that they could fire on the move from the mountings they had in their cruiser tanks. So being able to fire on the move is actually a very valuable capability. The fact is that as World War II progressed, everyone gave up on it because you're better off having a bigger gun and waiting until you see the enemy and shooting them. But the British were saying, hey, we can fire on the move, and you can't do that with this tank, so we don't want it.
But they did like plenty of other Czech stuff, especially the Bren gun and the Base machine gun in their tanks.
Beezer.
One reason listed that they didn't like the tank was because of the one-person turret.
Which is a fair criticism.
Yeah.
And the Germans fixed that.
Yeah, but they took out some ammo and put it in the loader. All right. The other fun one is Russian propaganda these days is very excited to point out that the Panzer 38T was actually designed by Russian. Alexei Surin, who emigrated during the First World War, was one of the designers in the Czech factory who were making it. So there you go. They're quick to jump on board. Say, yeah, we made all the best tanks. So that's what
I don't know. I mean, I can remember in the late 90s traveling through Russia, and all the train rolling stock had Skoda marks on the side. The poor old Czechs have always had a real talent for manufacturing, and it's a shame history was a real bastard to them in the 20th century.
All right. One of the surprising things is that the Nazis actually paid for their tanks. They were so desperate for more tanks in May and June of 1939 that they were throwing money at the company. It was CKD, it became BMM, something Munich. No,
I think the CKD mark lives on. Someone was telling me that basically every tram in Eastern Europe is a CKD. That's still beavering away.
So they were throwing money at the company making them to make more and taking what was left out of. And basically, they were taking what was left of the Czech government out of the equation. There were all sorts of issues with the Czech government, whether or not they were going to be paying for these tanks and so forth. And the Nazis just said, no, we don't care. We're just going to throw money at the company and because we want more tanks.
Look, in terms of Nazis paying, let's remember the factory has to be able to buy the raw materials. So at some point, the Nazis have to give them money to,
But I think
and the workers need to be able to afford food.
Yeah, but the agreement had been that they were giving money to the Czech government, and the government was going to be buying them.
No, cut those dudes out.
Yeah, basically because there was all sorts of issues there. So they said, no, we're just throwing money at the problem. All right, one of the fun ones is to make the riveted bolted armor plate. So as you'll see on the pictures, there's a lot of rivets on the and bolts on the tank.
And we all know riveted armor is the worst sort of armor, but
better than no armor.
In 1938, if you get a big hit, all the rivets spoil. But when the armor's this thin, it's coming through anyway.
Well, it depends what you're facing.
Yeah.
Anyway, they added paper soaked in oil between the plates to make the joins waterproof. So that was nice, clever idea. So basically, it meant they could actually go through a meter of water, a quarter meter of water, and still
I'm
not flood the
slightly
tank.
imagining the fire hazard, but when you've got live ammunition in your tank, what's a bit of oil impregnated paper?
Exactly.
Yeah.
All right. They had no observation ports on the sides or rear, just the cupola with 4 vision slits. So not great visibility out the front. Out the sides or rear. They had what doesn't come up a lot is they had a smoke grenade launcher at the rear of the hull. Which was fitted to fire grenades.
So you could run away.
Well, yeah. So you would fire. So basically, it was an angled box at the back of the hull, which would then fire grenades to your front, arcing up over the top of the turret, and then you would reverse back through the smoke to get out of observation.
And I mean, speaking of smoke, we've got one picture of a 12th Panzer Division. PZ-38T in Barbarossa, and it's the one towing the little fuel trailer. It's also got 2 interesting modifications on it. One is it's only 12th Division. They put a cylinder on the 3rd road wheel in the middle, which basically gave somewhere to stand on to get onto the deck of the tank.
Okay.
And the other thing is they actually put a smoke generator into the exhaust system, which you can see on the back of those. And it's only 12th division, so that's one for the model makers. You could do a couple little cute little additions.
We'll get to how many rivets are on each tank later on.
Should we take this moment to address our PZ-38T model making?
Oh. Right.
Let's do the accountability now.
The box of shame.
Yeah. So about a year ago, we got excited by Clayton from Workbench Hobbies to try and do a little building challenge of building PZ-38Ts, and Clayton built one, and Dave Zollo built one. Dave's a fantastic friend of the show, and Rob started building one, and I
at least bought one.
I was in the middle of moving house, and then I just realised that there is no space that Sheridan will let me have that I can just leave a partially completed model on for the time it takes to build it. And that's, my relationship with Sheridan is otherwise, very wonderful in many ways, but that's just not going to happen. So,
what's this room for then?
Well, no,
she never comes down here.
Yes, she does. Yes, she does. I have to pack all this stuff up and down, just in case she wants to exercise, which happens once a month, maybe. God, I'm lucky she doesn't watch this. Anywho, we failed in our challenge. Dave succeeded. Clayton obviously succeeded. Building models is his thing, and we did have on social media someone sent through. They've made a clay model of a PZ-38T, which was really cool. So yes, that's what happened there, and we apologise, and we probably won't do. If we do another model building challenge, we'll try harder.
I'm just going to break it out next week and finish it
done.
off. Yeah.
All right.
Yeah, hold me to that one.
Yeah.
Anyway, where were we? About the Panzer 38T. The loader would operate the turret machine gun. So not the commander who was firing the main gun, but the loader would fire it, which could either...
Rob, you're on the screen twice. Look at you.
Oh,
what a gorgeous man.
Handsome fellow.
So we were lucky enough to see a running PZ-38T at the Australian Museum of Armour.
Only on the Friday. Unfortunately, it broke down on the Friday, and I was stuck in the shed for the rest of the weekend.
But we've also got video from Russell Phillips, the British historian who sent it in to us. We're going to have to get him in for an interview. He seems like a lovely guy.
That's great.
So we actually got moving parts in the background behind us now, which is a new thing for us. So he's got video of a moving one. We saw and took pictures of a moving one. There are surprising, this is a testament to its reliability, how many moving PZ-38Ts are still in existence, because you don't see too many Vickers light tanks around.
No.
Not running.
No. And for Brett Parker, we haven't actually touched the beer tube. That was all head before. We've actually been drinking a Czech beer that I brought enough of to fill the beer tube with, but unfortunately I did not get here in time before John had already carried out the necessary logistics of filling the beer tube. So we're just going to drink the Pilsner from wherever it is, so starting out with Czech, going to something else.
So this is the Australian standard, the Vomit Bomb, the VB.
And we'll get to that.
We'll get back to the Pilsner Alcohols for beer review time.
But there might be other beers for beer review. As I said, there is a smorgasbord of beers. As I said, we're starting out with Czech, with the Pilsner, but then we might be going to something else. Anyway, the loader, as I was saying, would operate the turret MG, which could either be fixed in place as a coax MG or released to be independent of the main gun. So that was a nice little feature. So you can either be firing in parallel with the main gun or twisting it around and shooting around in all different directions.
And for what this tank was good at in war, which was advancing fast into the enemy's rear areas, the machine guns were probably as important as the main armament.
It had a rate of fire of about 15 rounds per minute for the main gun, with a gun elevation depression of -10 and +25 degrees. The Hull MG was limited to 10 degrees elevation, so it wouldn't shoot the main gun, and could also be fired by the driver in a fixed firing position. So if you're radio operator,
turn the tank and put it.
Yep. So if you didn't have that fourth crew member in the radio operator, you could just fix it in place, and then the driver could do some donuts and be shooting around all over the place.
Now, just quickly on the comments, Raghaus noting that the Swedes were using the Striv M41 well after World War II.
We'll get to that.
Yeah, Rob's going to get to that. A tactical gentleman from the Netherlands, g'day mate, wants to know if we're going to talk about the post-World War II Swedish vehicles. Maybe. Hang on for the show. We've got a long way to go, mate. No. Okay, Rob's got us. Brett Parker's drinking 4X Gold and reckons, we got standards, mate.
Yeah, I was about to say, when I was living in Darwin and the only things to drink were VB and 4X, I made sure I was only drinking VB. Anyway,
to be fair, since the Japanese took over the Australian breweries, Australian domestic lager is of a much higher quality than it was in our youth.
Anyway, all right. There's a large hatch placed on the front of the hull to allow access to the transmission. This is one of the things, just making better maintenance access. So it was a very reliable and maintenance-friendly tank, a serviceable tank for that reason. The Panzer 38 command tank was not well liked by the crew due to the lack of visibility.
And it was covered in antennas, which no one had figured out how dangerous covering your vehicle with antennas was at the start of World War II. But by the middle of the war, any vehicle covered with antennas was getting a lot of very unwelcome attention.
Yeah, they preferred the Panzer 3 as a command tank.
I would prefer the Panzer 3 too. Yeah. For that.
Yes. And there was supposedly some of the... maybe I'll get through all that. Anyway, the Nazis improved the 37mm ammo that went with the tank by giving it better anti-tank and high explosive. However, a lack of tungsten meant the premium anti-tank rounds were very rarely seen. So the ones that could go through 40 mils of armor at 1,000 meters, whatever. 1,000 meters per second firing, and blah, 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 blah. They very rarely saw those. So most of the anti-tank rounds were fairly standard. They also installed better radios. What a surprise.
And one of the lessons of World War II is that the radios were what made the tank. Tanks that were mediocre because they were waiting to see a signal flag through a periscope suddenly became very good when they could, hey, Hans, head straight ahead.
The command tanks were the ones without the hull machine gun. They had an extra armor welded over it that provided more room for radios and maps. And some of them even had dummy main guns.
Now, before you move on, Joe Seattle wants to know if you can mail us beer. Yes, contact us. Probably Facebook's the easiest.
From the States.
We're up for it, mate, if you're up for it. Cornelius is asking about the model building, which didn't happen. But we have had full disclosure on that, and we apologise. Apparently, Corny's in the Gungahlin Brewery, so good stuff.
Enjoy yourself there.
Okay. Yeah, we should probably try some of their beer in the show sometime. We've tried the other Canberra breweries.
I don't know them.
Oh, yeah, they're from Gungahlin, just on the light rail. Yeah, it's good.
Light rail, you say? We don't have that in Belconnor.
No.
Not for another 40 years, according to Andrew Barr. Anyway, not bitter at all. Anyway, sorry. Conflicts. Well, Nazi-occupied Czechoslovakia fought a very quick war against Hungary in March.
Why not? The world's on fire. Just go for it.
In March of 1939 with LT-35s, but no noted use of the 10 LT-38s that had been produced by that stage. So
10 isn't enough to really.
I know, but they might have just thrown them out to see how they went in trials. I mean, but
they didn't.
It was one of those things that you say, well, is it going to go? How does it work? But yeah, no, I thought I'd just throw that in there because I'd never heard of this conflict. As I said, this is basically those Czech folks who sympathised with Hitler, saying, you know what, we're going to stretch our legs and see what happens. Then we got the invasion of Poland of September 1939. That's where it all really starts to kick off. 2,959 tanks in the field army were involved with the 3rd Light Division. There were 57 Panzer 38Ts. 7 of those were damaged but recovered and repaired during that conflict. In other formations, there were 164 of its predecessor, the Panzer 35T. But the main thing is there were over 1,000 each of the Panzer 1s and 2s. There was only 87 Panzer IIIs. They led the advance, however, and took most of the damage, with 26 of them being knocked down, whilst the 197 Panzer IVs were distributed between the invading divisions, which otherwise lacked good HE firing guns.
I mean, the 4 was, and this is early in its career, designed as a support vehicle more than a fighting tank. It was only because they ran out of ideas, and it was a good chassis.
Well, they had the short barrel 75s to throw down some HE rounds for taking out artillery and anti-tank nests. And so they were rather than going forward as a mass group, they were spread out amongst all the divisions to say, right, we need some HE over there to take out that bunker or that anti-tank nest, whatever else. That's what they were there for. All the tanks were found not to have enough armour and were vulnerable to the anti-tank rifles of the Polish forces. The Nazis experimented with using trucks to carry the Panzer 38Ts forward.
Which is an idea. I mean, we saw that in the rebellion in Russia last year, that they were zipping their tanks on truck beds up the highway. Trucks are a lot better now than they were in 1939, so I think that's partly why that idea didn't work then, but it does work now.
God, I'm noticing the difference between the Pilsner. Anyway, drink more and it'll go away. Anyway, hi to Captain Meow from Austria. Welcome along.
Well, it says Austria. That could be Australia. That could be
Austria. Oh, okay.
Yeah, clarify, mate. Clarify. Anyway, thank you. Raghal's saying that the most of the museum PZ-38Ts are the Swedish ones that got retired in the 80s. So that would make some sense.
There you
go. They're all painted to look like they were in Ghost Division, let me tell you.
Look, when Lottie tells me that it was dug out of the bog with those markings, I'm saying, well, that's fine. That's what they're going with. Anyway, from the trucks were carrying the PZ Panzer 38Ts forward during the Polish invasion, thinking they'd be quicker, but it didn't work out and was never used again. There you go. The brittle armour and the rivets meant the armour was deadly to the occupants at times. So when they were getting shot up by anti-tank rifles and guns, it would cause spoiling inside.
And again, it's one of those interesting things that anti-tank rifles, particularly rifles, the basically big anti-materiel rifles that, like the boys' rifle, get sold to us.
Boys' Own Adventure. I still love that.
They still get sold to us as these things were completely useless. And it's like, well, hang on, they could definitely deal with the PZ-38T, and even at the end of the war, they could take out a Panther from the side. So they weren't useless weapons the way that they've often been portrayed.
That's why all the Panzer IVs had Scherzen on them, because they was to stop those anti-tank rifles.
Yeah, but that's imposing a cost of a countermeasure on the enemy. That means your weapon is still being quite effective.
The invasion of Denmark. So yes, it was only a 6-hour war, but there was a lot more, and there were a lot more bicycles involved than there were tanks. And I couldn't find anything definite on this, but there were probably some Panzer 38Ts included, along with the Panzer IIs of the 6 squads deployed from the 23rd, 24th, and 25th Panzer battalions, which did include, which were making up the 7th Panzer Division at the time. So they had them. They were probably deployed. There's not a lot of tanks there, as I say. There was a lot more bicycles. When you're looking at the order of battle in that invasion, there was a lot more bicycle battalions on both sides of the conflict than there were tanks. All right, just let's just say.
Captain Meow's clarified they're Austrian.
There you go.
Welcome to the show.
We're Austrian too, aren't we?
Kinda. We have a spiritual bond with the Austrians, but yeah.
All right. Invasion of France.
Here we go.
10th of May, 1940. 250 Panzer 38Ts were involved in the 7th and 8th Divisions. They were deployed as medium tanks. Overall, they only lost 54 tanks, 54 Panzer 38Ts, and only received 36 replacements.
Now, I believe the kill-to-loss ratio of these tanks in the France invasion was 17-1, as in they were killing 17 tanks for every loss. It was a very successful campaign for the Germans, and the PZ-38Ts did extremely well in this, mostly because the French were inept. But,
I'm just going to say, I don't do maths without a spreadsheet, so I'm going to leave that with you. Right.
Sure.
Right. So in the 7th Division, Rommel quickly had his troops adding Rommel boxes, basically kit boxes, to the tanks to carry.
Trust Rommel to name the equipment after himself.
Exactly. Well, yeah. Well, that's exactly what. And extra fuel canisters. In the 8th Division, they added fire extinguishers. There you go.
They sound like a smart group.
All right. Now, here's a little bit. I'm not even sure John even bothered to read this bit that I put in there.
No, I haven't read this.
So I write these things up.
I'm looking forward to hearing it, Rob. Come on, lay some knowledge on me.
Ghost Division by Sabaton, with apologies to Joachim Yoki Brodin, which is pronounced Uki.
Okay.
Fast as the wind, the invasion has begun, shaking the ground with the force of 1,000 guns. First in the line of fire, first into hostile land. Tanks leading the way, charging the lines with the force of a furious storm, fast as the lightning phantoms. Swarm. 200 miles at nightfall, taken within a day, thus earning their name, earning the fame. They are the Panzer elite, born to compete, never retreat. Ghost Division, living or dead, always ahead, fed by your dread, always ahead, as the Blitzkrieg rages on, breaking morale with the sound of the blazing guns. There you go.
Okay, thank you for giving us a spoken word version.
As I said, that's the opening for Ghost Division by Sabaton. So John really should learn to read the script before.
Yeah. So a couple of things. One is, if I could have one wish, it would actually be to be back to raise the ghost of Erwin Rommel and show him the YouTube video of 50,000 Europeans going completely berserk singing along to Ghost Division at, I think, the Wacken Festival. And be like, 2024, mate, your legend lives on.
Uke is actually half Czech. His mother's Czech.
Okay.
There you go. So.
Okay. Now, the other thing I want to talk about quickly about Ghost Division, slightly the Blitzkrieg in general. Remember, Blitzkrieg was never a German doctrine. It was just a description that Western media put on what they were dealing with, which was basically the Germans being extremely fast. And getting inside the OODA loop of the...
Okay, if you'd read the script, you'd see I'd cover all this stuff.
Okay, but what I want to talk about is the landholders, which is why the German Panzer divisions had to stay ahead of the rest of the force. If they got within 25 miles of any other German forces, they had to submit themselves to the planning and logistics of the rest of the army, which is saying we don't want too many units moving through this crossroad in an hour, which is a very important thing to do. So they had to keep staying ahead to retain their freedom of movement. And it got so wild that German High Command had no idea what these Hooters were doing. Guderian was arrested in the middle of the campaign and held for 24 hours because they thought that all these Panzer generals were traitors because they were completely out of control. But, you know, they were confusing their own side, but boy, they were confusing the French even more. And it wasn't so much the speed of the PZ-38T, although it was good, it was the reliability. And as we've discussed before, a tactically slow tank can be strategically fast if it doesn't break down and can keep going. Yeah. Sorry, Rob. Keep going.
As I was saying, Sabaton, the favoured band of all tank enthusiasts, has put out a song called Ghost Division, which is accounting for this bit that I'm going to go through. So, 16th,
and it is in our YouTube playlist of tank songs.
There you go. 16th to 17th of May, 1940. The plan was for the infantry to breach the Maginot Line with tanks kept for further operations, so basically being held onto. However, Rommel started at 1800 hours on the 16th of May with verbal orders. So basically, somebody mentioned, look, we're going to come up to the Maginot Line, we're going to stop there and prepare to let the infantry go through. But if you see a gap, look, exploit it. And with those words, Rommel Rommel was off. All right, so they'd already had 6 days of advance, and so they're racing through the Ardennes forest, and with that little bit of wiggle room with verbal orders, he then spent the next 12 hours advancing 50 kilometres through the Maginot Line, through a bunch of French divisions, and kept on going until he'd taken the bridges over the River Meuse, I want to say. All right.
But, I mean, some of these river crossings they were making, they hadn't been planned for. It was just a case of finding some barges in the river and getting them across. And again, this is where your 10-ton tank can do things that your 30-ton tank cannot, because the 10-ton tank can be in a much smaller barge, and there's a lot of smaller barges lying around your French waterways.
So I've got to say, there'll be a lot more people writing a lot better things about the Ghost Division advance through the Maginot Line than I ever could. So I'll just say that he went 50 kilometres through enemy territory in 12 hours from 6 o'clock one night to, 13 hours, 7 o'clock the next morning, where he advanced 50 kilometres. Then when he got to a position, he said, right, this will do us. He then left his tanks and a motorcycle company, which are the only things that could keep up with his advance, holding a position, and then went back to find the rest of his division. So remember, he's a divisional commander, Rommel, and he's only taken his tanks and his motorcycles. He's left all his infantry and all the support forces back at the Maginot Line. And at the same time, his chief of staff he was with the rest of the division, 10 kilometres on the Belgian / on the Nazi side of the Maginot Line, had written orders from higher Corps Command was received at 8 o'clock, 2000 hours, that the attack would start at 0800 hours the next morning. But they couldn't get in touch with Rommel to tell him about the orders, because he was already 2 hours in. He'd already started his advance 2 hours earlier. Rommel seemingly only lost radio contact when he didn't want to hear anything. He
would not be the first commander in history to do that. I mean, Nelson famously, according to legend, put the telescope to his eye patch and said, "I can't see the signal."
Right. And the rest of the Corps was, at that same time, the rest of the Corps was having a break due to the effort they'd already gone through for the last 6 days. Rommel got halfway back in an armoured car by itself through the French countryside with a number of French divisions all around the place by 7 o'clock in the next morning, so 0700 hours on the 17th of May, to find out. He was trying to find out what the rest of his division was doing. And at this time, he was getting the French to surrender to him, because they saying, "Oh, what's a German general doing?
He's in our rear,
coming from behind us. We must have been overrun and surrounded," which sort of was, but sort of wasn't. And he got them all to surrender. So on his advance, he managed to damage the French 1st Armoured Division and significantly damaged 5 infantry divisions along the way. They ended up capturing 3,500 French soldiers out of a overall 10,000 captured in that sector of the front over the next 2 days, whilst only losing 40 dead and 75 wounded themselves. So it was a very hard push over a short number of days of advance, and I bet there was a lot of tank chocolate being eaten at that point in time.
And you've got to remember as well that
for those who don't know, tank chocolate
was amphetamines.
Amphetamines. That would bet because they were not getting a lot of sleep, boys and girls. They were pushing.
And this was partly how they were getting inside the command loops of the Allies, was because they were working 24 hours around the clock. And they ended up having to let the British go at Dunkirk because they were seeing pink animals with 15 legs. But it got them a long way while it got them going. The other thing to think about here, though, is that the whole Fall-Gelb plan required the enormous speed that the Panzer generals put on, even though the rest of the German army wasn't capable of dealing with it. And as you're describing, even Rommel's division wasn't capable of dealing with the speed that they were advancing. It's some interesting problems.
All right. Then we get to 20th of May, the Battle of Arras. So...
you don't call it Arras?
Arras? Arras.
Okay. The French would definitely call it Arras. Yeah.
There you go. I speak foreign. Yeah, just remember that.
I mean, British poets definitely rhyme at Arras in their poetry.
There you go. Yeah. All right. Rather than take on the entrenched French and British forces in the village of Arras, the order was given to bypass and isolate them, because why take somebody on when you can just go around them and cut off their supplies and let them say, "Oh, what am I going to do now?" However, on the 21st of May, the British forces, which were 2 infantry battalions and supporting 58 Matilda 1s and 16 Matilda 2s, counterattacked, causing chaos in the German advance, as they could not damage the heavy armour of the infantry tanks. There were also 6 French Somois joined in the counterattack. However, there was no coordination between the British, whose anti-tank guns fired on the French, who then returned fire, and the French. So basically, you've got these columns of German panzers racing past these dug-in Allied forces, and when the Allied forces said, right, we're going to attack these guys, because just because they're not attacking us doesn't mean we can't attack them. They've busted out of their emplacements and taken on these columns as they're going past. And there was chaos amongst the German forces because they could not hurt the Matilda 1s and Matilda 2s. Now, the Matilda 1s only have a machine gun, so they weren't doing a whole lot. And
they weren't that well armoured either, but I mean,
No.
the Matilda 2, it's the first tank this show ever did, was an extremely formidable beast for 1940. There's some doubts being expressed in the comments about Rob's ability to speak foreign. But,
and thank you for joining us, Slow-Mo Tenenbaum.
All right.
Yeah, as I said, Australians only speak English and foreign. We don't know anything else.
Keep talking, Rob. We've got a lot of ground to cover.
However, the point being is that once the Matildas broke out, then they found that the 38.
But I mean, a Matilda breakout is top speed, realistically, maybe 20 kilometres an hour.
Yeah, but the point being is that the 37mm guns couldn't handle them. However, because the Allied, the Brits didn't have any HE rounds, they couldn't do anything to the infantry that was around them. They only had machine guns.
Machine gunning. That's just something. But,
and running over things as well.
Yeah.
They did a bit of running over things. However, once the German artillery and air support and the 88s were brought to bear, the ineffectiveness of their tanks was overcome, and 60 of the 88 Allied tanks were lost for 37 German tanks. Right? So they were able to take out a number of tanks.
But as we discussed before, it's great if your divisional anti-air can save the day when your headquarters is under attack. It would be better still for your divisional anti-air to focus on anti-air and not be trying to blow up tanks, because nothing else works.
All right. So while this counterattack and the chaos slowed the Nazis and made them delay their advance to secure the flanks of their panzer columns, basically they said, look, we can't keep pushing forward like this. We've got to make sure our flanks are secured as we're driving for the channel. It was a long enough delay that for them to get to the channel that the Brits were then able to evacuate from Dunkirk. So it was a great achievement, but probably a very unexpected one. On the other hand, the chaos and confusion of the Allied command was even greater. The French were giving orders to a counterattack south, then that general was replaced, and the next day was giving orders to counterattack north and south. Then another general died in a car crash on his way back to giving new orders. The French tanks were being dispersed to infantry divisions who would then not give them back when a tank attack was needed. So basically they wanted to concentrate the tanks again so they could do something with them. They said, the infantry division said, no, these are our 6 tanks. You can't have them.
Yeah, but also, the French were so inept in this, partly because the French government had been terrified the French army would stage a coup. The things like, the Germans were pulling gasoline, petrol out of French service stations on the highways, and the French couldn't because their tanks had needed special fuel and they were waiting for the special fuel trucks to turn up.
Right.
Yeah.
There was no communications with the Air Force. However, the Air Force was mostly either shot down or was relocating very quickly back to Britain. But there were still no comms with them to actually use them in any way, shape or form.
The crossing of the Meuse was one of those pivotal moments, sliding doors moments of history, where if the French Air Force had got its act together and bombed that river crossing, or even, going back to breaking out of the Ardennes, history could have been completely different, but the bombers stayed on the tarmac and didn't get orders to do anything.
So what this really did was, to my mind, was really show the power of Blitzkrieg at getting inside the opponent's OODA loop. So
there we go.
Observe, orient, decide, act. So whereas the Germans were able to react to the counterattack by the Matildas and do something about it, because of the speed of their Panzer column advances, the Allies were unable to carry out any sort of effective counter to it. And so the Blitzkrieg, that was the entire point of Blitzkrieg, is that it got inside the opponent's OODA loop and they could not react quick enough to affect the advance of the Germans.
It's also really important to remember that the Germans had been in a state of constant staff work revision. The Spanish Civil War, they'd been right there, they'd observed the lessons. Then they got to the invasion of Poland, and they viewed the invasion of Poland as a near failure. There were so many things that went wrong that they got away with, but they were smart enough at that point in the war to reevaluate everything they've done. And they enormous changes to the German army from the invasion of Poland to the invasion of France. At this point,
they didn't let their egos get in the way of changing their doctrine and how they did things and what they wanted to do.
Oh, I mean, they still had plenty of egos.
Erwin
Rommel.
I understand that, but they at least actually acted upon.
Yeah, and they did the work, and they did the work, and they did the work. And meanwhile, France and the UK were sitting there mostly with World War I level doctrine in the heads of their generals.
7 months.
Yeah,
7 months from September, saying, "Oh, we'll be fine." It'll be.
On the screen right now. There's that little thingamajig on the third road wheel. Yeah, there you go.
All right. Then we get into the invasion of Yugoslavia, where 8th Division went into Yugoslavia in April 1941 from Hungary. They lost 7 Panzer 38Ts as part of their advance. All right, and they went through from there down to Greece and blah 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 blah. Then we get to the big one: invasion of Russia, Operation Barbarossa of June 1941. So, Panzer 38Ts at this stage. The 7th Division had 173, 8th Division had 125, 12th Division had 117, 19th Division had 127, and 20th Division had 118. So around 750 Panzer 38Ts, making up 23% of the tank force going into Russia. So where they'd been 9% going into Poland and maybe less than that going into France, this is where they were really a big percentage of the tanks going into Russia.
And it's true that a PZ-38T was pretty much a speed bump to a KV-1 or a T-34, but most of the Russian tank force at this point in the war was still BTs.
T-26s, T-70s, and...
Anyway, so but quite light tanks. That the Panzer 38 was still quite capable against those, but once increasing numbers of T-34s and KV-1s started coming around, that was when the Germans were like, okay, we need to reevaluate the use of this vehicle.
Yeah, this is not winning for us anymore. All right. So 23% of the tank force going to Russia. They took heavy losses after the opening upper hand against the BTs, the T-26s and the T-70s when they started encountering more of the T-34s and KV-1s. Basically, there were some T-34s and KV-1s around, but there were not the numbers and there was not the doctrine for concentrating them, which is why they were able to make such huge gains from early on. But as the T-34s and KV-1s became increased in production, it became a lot more difficult, a lot worse for the Panzer 38Ts. The long distances they travelled also led to lots of mechanical breakdowns. So basically drive a lot further. I mean, it doesn't matter how reliable and maintainable and serviceable your tank is when you're going.
If it gets no maintenance, it's going to break down.
If you're going so far, if you're going from Prague to Moscow, that's a long drive at 40 k's an hour type thing.
So the thing to remember here is that while the PZ-38T was extremely reliable, German maintenance was in a complete shambles, and their planning for Barbarossa had been utterly inadequate, as you know, the German winter the Russian winter showed.
Yeah, I think they'd done more on planning for their maintenance than anybody else would have. It was just a case of it was just so much that they just couldn't handle it.
Yeah, and the big thing to make sense of the German campaign in Russia, you just look at every time they got more than 180 miles from a railhead, they bogged down, and that was because the supply trucks couldn't get from the railhead to the front fast enough over a bigger distance than that. And you need supply trucks for your supply trucks if you go any further. Yeah. The problem for the PZ-38...
The old donkey problem.
Yeah. The problem for the PZ-38T was just that because it was very reliable, the commanders were saying, don't bother servicing that, we need a tank, keep going. Yeah. And, significant breakdowns need to be read with a lot of context when you get into that sort of thing.
All right. So that led to a lot of mechanical breakdowns, along with the cold winters where they just wouldn't start, and then finally a lack of fuel, which then meant that a lot of the Panzer 38Ts were destroyed by their own crews because I'm not going to leave it here for somebody else to take over while well, I can just walk away from it type thing. And so they said, right, we're just going to blow these things up ourselves. So from 1942, they were mostly gone from frontline units. Losses started with 33 Panzer 38Ts in June and then hit a high of 183 in July of 1941 as they went through Barbarossa, with 796 lost by the end of 1941, which was more than they started with.
I just want to stress again, because very few people have it through their heads probably. Yes, but the start of Barbarossa was amazing for the Germans, and they took, inflicted 5 million casualties on the Soviets, and they thought the Soviets would have to collapse. But the German army in those first 6 weeks lost 1 million soldiers, and they were the heart and soul of the army. And while the Russians were able to regenerate, and it turned, the Germans had underestimated the number of Russian divisions by I think 200-300. I mean, it was they were just starting to dawn on them the size of the animal they'd got in a fight with.
The Germans did very well in any sort of campaign that would be over and done with in a season. Anything beyond that, they just could not last. Anyway, the last unit to receive the Panzer 38T tanks was the 22nd Tank Division, equipped with 77 tanks. And the 22nd Tank Division was the only unit to widely use the Alf's G. Its tanks also had differences in equipment. Aside from the racks for fuel, canisters, boxes for personal Rommel boxes, they added to the left side. The 22nd Tank Division was actively used during the fighting for the Crimea and Rostov-on-Don. When you hear about that plenty of times these days.
Which is a big campaign that probably didn't get the attention it deserved, but there was a lot of fighting down there.
All right.
A lot of amphibious work as well. But,
a lot of rivers. The light Czech tanks were used by this division until its dissolution in March of 1943. The last tanks of this type to be used in battle were the 13 vehicles used by the 8th and 20th Tank Divisions on 30th of June 1943. Meanwhile, poor old Hungarians who came in on the side of the Axis were given 102 Panzer 38Ts from the Nazis in 1942. After losing most of their own light tanks on the Eastern Front. So basically, just as the Germans were saying, these tanks are no good for the Eastern Front, hey, Hungary, how about we give you these and you come and fight for us on the Eastern Front with these? So it doesn't sound like a winning hand to me.
That's a bad deal for the Hungarians. Right. So why don't you guys want these tanks anymore? Oh, no, now they're fine. Fine.
All right. So the Hungarians called them the T-38 because why not come up with a new name?
Tank 1938, why not? Yeah.
All right, so they designated them as a medium tank.
Oh, boy, your army's in trouble when a 10-ton tank's a medium, but yeah.
and then they designated the Panzer IV as a heavy tank.
Fair enough.
All right, so the first armoured conflicts with them on the way to Stalingrad in July 1942 saw them taking on Russians with 60 T-60s, that's fun to say, M3 Stuarts and 7 T-34. So only 7 T-34s. Okay, so that
gives you a sense of how few T-34s they had at that point.
Which is not an overwhelming force when taking on 25 Panzer IVs and 89 T-38s. With both during this conflict, both sides were capturing the other side's tanks and reusing them, and then getting shot by their own anti-tank units. So the Hungarians captured Stuarts, the Russians captured T-38s. Both sides were using them, and then they were getting shot by their own anti-tank units. So that's a bit of crazy stuff. However, a T-38 did manage to take out a T-34 in this conflict by shooting it in the rear.
I was going to say, didn't do that through the glasses. But
no. Yeah. All right. By September of 1942, so 3 months later, the force was down to 12 T-38s and 2 Panzer IVs left out of the 25 they started with, type thing. By January 43, when the Soviets started counterattacking, the Hungarians were blowing up their own tanks when they would not start. Whoop, John, what have I done?
Are we good?
There you
go.
Due to the cold or lack of fuel. And by March 1943, the Hungarian Armoured Division was pulled out of the line and had no T-38s left in service. Any remaining T-38s in Hungarian service were then used for training. North Africa.
Oh, North Africa.
North Africa.
I hope everyone's enjoying Rob's potted history of the Second World War here. But, we don't need another beer yet, Rob.
Don't need to get... All right.
No. I've got a full glass.
Great.
For those on the audio, the beer tube has come down off the plinth, and here we go.
It has been conquered. It's been climbed.
We won.
All right.
So Brett Parker has noted that the PZ-38T was being up-armoured through this process, which is entirely correct. And he's noting the mice eating the electrics during winter, which
still happening. This is still happening these days, right now in Ukraine.
Particularly in the era, though, when a lot of wiring was done with wrapping cloth around the copper and then soaking it in wax. That was basically calories to mice and rats.
Yeah, the mice plagues in last winter in Ukraine were freaking insane. Anyway, in January of 1942, a tropical version was built of the Panzer 38T was built for use in North Africa with a better engine cooling, better air filters, extra fuel, keeping the sand out, and all sorts of other bits and pieces. And there are photos of them being loaded onto the ME Messerschmitt 323 Gigant, the giant transport plane. Which could carry 13 tons.
Yeah, so like, hey, in it goes. With a couple of spare parts and one or two engineers.
And however, I don't know if any of the planes actually flew with them. So you see the photos of them going in, but I've never actually found any all that hard. But nothing came out saying yes, we're flying these tanks around the place. And
but again, this is the role of the light tank: is it can be air mobile.
And the 21 Panzer 38Ts were converted, however, were never sent to North Africa. So they said, by this stage, we're not sending them there. We're just going to ship across a bunch more other stuff.
You start to fall at this point in the war in 42 into the crap tank fallacy, which is that if you start sending, if you only got room for one tank in the transport, you may as well send a good one.
Not to mention they started running out of the Gigant planes because they're getting shot down over the Mediterranean.
And the other thing worthy of note is that North Africa, a lot less river crossings. And so the advantage of the Panzer 38 with its 10-ton weight of being able to get across light bridges and being put on barges, all that goes away in North Africa. So,
By 1942, they were being removed from frontline service and reallocated to secondary roles or converted into other variants using their reliable chassis. The turrets were removed from 351 of the remaining tanks, which were then made into bunkers around Europe. Intact Panzer 38Ts were reallocated for training as train defence, reallocated as for training other tank drivers or as train defence. So they just load them on the back of a flatbed carrier on a train and said, here's your train defence for whatever you need it for. And as ammo carriers. We'll get onto the ammo carriers later on. The last combat action of World War II for the Panzer 38Ts was in Romanian service after the Romanians had joined the Allies, with 3 lost trying to cross a river under fire in March of 1945. There you go.
Okay. So, wow.
We're still going.
Yeah, I know. We've got a long way to go.
Operators. So, Czechoslovakia did not operate them, as the army never bought them, and so they went straight to Nazi Germany, who had 1,400 of them. The Kingdom of Romania got 50. The Kingdom of Bulgaria got 10. Hungary, as I said before, got 102 in 1942 from old Nazi stock. The Slovak Republic got 21 of the tanks built for Lithuania, plus another 48 later on, so 69 total. Sweden built 220 under license with upgraded armour and stronger engine. They retired them from service in 1951, but then converted them into APCs in the 1960s and used them through till 1971.
I mean, we've seen these things sputter around. The idea of trying to make an APC off this.
They looked as good as anything. I mean, seeing the photos of them, they put a 20mm Bofors on top of them. Jesus. They carried 8 troops. I mean,
it must have sputtered slowly under that kind of load, though. But anyway,
I don't know. But that's what they brought out, and they used them to the 1970s. I mean,
as we keep saying, it's better than walking.
Yeah. Switzerland bought 24 without weapons and modified turrets, and they then fit the weapons themselves. Peru bought 24 and had them in service from 1938 till 1988. That's a good 50 years,
Well,
boys and
if the
girls.
tank keeps running, it's good for beating up the rebels. So
Yeah, they were critical in the 1941 Ecuadorian-Peruvian War against the Ecuadorian army that had no modern anti-tank guns and whose artillery was horse-drawn. So horses don't like being shot at. Let me tell you, boys and girls.
Yeah.
They were also used in counterinsurgency roles against the Shining Path communist guerrillas in the 1980s, finally retiring in 1988.
Yeah. Wow.
Yeah.
That's one of those things. The FPV drones have completely eliminated the value of an old low value tank. Yeah, because it used to be that if your insurgents only had small arms, then any tank was death to them. Whereas now, a $50 worth of FPV drone and a lump of high explosive, and you've got yourself a tank killer. So
I think they cost a little bit more than $50, but yeah, not much.
The ones they're using in Ukraine are right down there. The ones they're trying to sell them are, $100,000 each. But,
we don't bother with those things. Iran, as I said, bought 50, and those got used against the Anglo-Soviet invasion of 1941, but lost them all.
Yeah. They were overmatched. It's not the fault of the tank.
There was what would we say, 1,000 T-26s coming in from Iraq and the Soviet Union. So there was they got it, but it was still a poor effort saying, oh, we're a neutral country. Yeah, we might have still open negotiations with the Nazis and the Axis forces, but we're still a neutral country. And the Brits and the Soviets saying, but you've got lots of fuel, and they want fuel, so we're going to invade you and take you over just to make sure you don't sell them fuel.
It's one of my favourite things in that Australian history is always banging on. We can't understand why we invaded the oil fields in Borneo at the end of World War II. It was such a waste of lives. And it's like the whole purpose of this country's military effort is capturing the oil fields. And definitely the British were similarly fixated on the oil fields.
Yes, there's a reason why the Sultan of Brunei has been in power since 1964 and is not going anywhere. All right. Models. As seen with all the names, each country that had them meant that there were a lot of slightly different models. So we'll just go through the German ones.
Oh, right, okay.
And where I say model, think Aufs, F. So the Panzer 38T, models A through D, were up to September 1940. They made changes from the base Czech model with the fourth crew member. And then convoy lights, so nice little hidden lights so you can follow along in the dark to make sure you don't run into the tank in front of you. Yeah,
the idea with marker lights is that basically the only thing that can see them is the tank immediately behind. And as long as they can see
and in front. So you want one in front and behind. So But basically they're low, small, and not visible from a lot of different distance.
The idea is that if a plane's flying overhead or an observer's on a hillside nearby, then they're not going to pick you up on these lights. But the crew immediately around can see them straight ahead. And if they
I'll tell you what, having done a few night convoys under bloody lights out conditions, it's bloody hard to keep your eyes on the light in front of you and saying, are they stopping? No, hang on. Oh, no, don't run into them. Yeah, type thing. It's not a fun job, I've got to say.
Little low-speed Bingles?
No, but it was not. But it was not a fast movement type thing. Sorry. Then we get into the turret machine gun. They introduced a limiter to stop it shooting the main gun. So not just the hull MG from elevating to shoot the main gun, but they also had the turret MG limiter to stop it traversing to the left to shoot the main gun.
Oh, that must have been a real problem for them to implement that solution. Yeah.
Stop shooting our main gun. All right.
I do always love when you see schematic drawings of the Lancaster bombers, they literally built humps into the fuselage so that the dorsal machine gunner, physically the barrel would be lifted over the tail of the...
All right. They removed the rail antenna, so basically there was a great big rail situation around linking around the back, and said, look, this isn't doing what we need. We'll just use the actual whip antenna that we've got on the front. Yeah,
but it's the same thing. You see the Soviet mid-war tanks with these huge, look like handrails around the turret, which are actually antennas. And they got better at antenna design in the intervening years. So
the Nazis also introduced the smoke grenade launchers, tank crew intercom, so the commander can talk to the driver and everybody else type thing. Better radios, as I said before. They also thickened the turret ring to stop them getting jammed by shrapnel. So when they started up armoring the tanks, they said, right, one of the issues, one of the areas that they're looking at is saying where the turret spins around on the hull, there's a chance that any sort of shrapnel that gets in there will then jam the turret in a forward-facing position, like Tiger 131 with the Churchill
6-inch shells. Yeah.
Well, it was 2-pounder. Yeah, just
No,
getting
6-pounders.
6-pounder. Well, yeah. So just getting jammed in there. And then a fun one, moving the shovels and the pickaxes from the rear to the side. So moving around the
Pioneer tools.
Yes, that's one. The Panzer 38T models E through F. They increased the frontal armor by to 50 mils, so basically doubling on, by bolting on an additional 25 millimeter armor plates from November of 1940. Which then needed increased springs in the suspension, so they added more springs. Oops, done them again.
That's fine. Yeah, you're good.
They introduced cap coverings for the track tension and crank start ports, so they wouldn't get covered with mud. They raised the muffler. The smoke grenade launchers became standard for tanks rather than added on afterwards. They also added the hooks on hooks for holding spare track links to the front. So that was one of the things of saying, yeah, you know what, we got to carry spare track links. Where are we going to put it to make it useful?
Over the armour. Over the armour. Over the armour on the glasses. That's where we put the spare track links.
Panzer 38T Model G was from October 41. So had integral 50 millimeter frontal armour. It reduced the rivets. Fewer rivets, John. Fewer rivets. More welding.
Elimination of the rivets would have been where they should have been aiming.
More welding, and less bolts, fewer rivets. They were rolling out 50 to 70 tanks per month. This was the height of perfection for the Panzer 38T. For it could improve no further. The narrow hull and small turret meant it could not take a larger gun, unlike the Panzer 3s and 4s. But it could not then, and the gun it had could not damage the T-34s and KV-1s. And even the Valentines and Matilda 2s that were appearing on the Eastern Front. So then we get finally to the Panzer 38T Model NA, which is North Africa, which is, as I was saying before, the tropical version. They used standard welded armor and instead of rivets, and they modified turret with racks for extra fuel canisters and, as mentioned before, better air intakes. Now, this is a fun one to say. Panzer Befehlswagen 38T, which is the command version of the Panzer 38T. They had additional radio antennas fitted, including a frame antenna over the rear upper hull. The hull-mounted machine gun was removed to make room for radio equipment. Variants.
Oh, God, the variants. God help us.
All right. We have got to keep on going. All right. Serviceability and the reliability of the Panzer 38T meant that the chassis was easily converted to carry out multiple other functions once it was no longer fit for being a frontline tank, leading to a number of variants.
The Marder being,
Marder 3 tank destroyer with a German 75mm Pak 40 gun in an open-topped turret. Then the Marder 3 with a Soviet-based 7.62 millimeter centimeter, well, whatever. Pak 36
times 10.
Yeah, huge. So basically, they had variants with Russian guns and with Nazi guns. The Grill self-propelled gun with the 15 centimeter heavy infantry gun in open-topped turret.
You wouldn't be on the receiving end of that, but on the other hand, it's a glass cannon, so yeah.
Well, I mean, it's there to provide arty. One of the favourites of the low tiers in World of Tanks.
Now, this is my favourite name of a German tank ever.
Munitions Panzer 38. Guess what it carried? It carried ammunition.
Wow.
So it was it carried ammunition for the Grill. Flak Panzer 38 self-propelled anti-aircraft gun with 2 centimeter gun and open-topped turret. The SD KV 140/1 Alfs Flanger Panzer 38 mit
Mm.
2 centimeters, which was the German reconnaissance tank with 20 millimeter turret from the SKFZ something or other 222 armored car.
Okay.
They only built 70 of those, so basically it was a recon version of it.
Yeah.
Then they also had a same thing with a 7.5 close support gun in a reconnaissance tank, mounted in a modified superstructure. Only 2 of those built. Then we get into the even more funner Nahkampfkanone 1, which was the Swiss-built tank destroyer similar to the Marder 3. They only built 1 of those. The Panzer Bandwagen. I want to get on that bandwagon.
Yeah, that sounds like a good thing.
Which was 301, which was the Swedish-built Panzer 38Ts converted, rebuilt into armored. So this is the armored personnel carriers we were talking about before. So they converted 220 of the ones they had from 1961 to 1971. From there,
I would not want to be in the back of those going over a landmine, but luckily Sweden avoided that war.
Yeah, the Storm Artillery Wagen M43, which was the same chassis with a Swedish assault gun with a 75 millimeter Swedish gun. They built 36 of those. The Takum T-38 Romanian tank destroyer, which was a higher than the Marder, which was already high. They basically took a Soviet, I want to say 76 mil gun, and just whacked it on the top of the chassis. Do you remember when we did the Valentine, when the Romanians took I think it was a 15 centimeter gun, and they whacked it on top of that? Yeah, that sort of thing.
Yep.
Right. And then the loved and hated Hetzer Panzer 38 was built on a lengthened and widened Panzer 38T chassis. And finally, the G13 Swiss designation of the post-war built Panzer 38T, sold by Czechoslovakia. And these are the ones that are still around today and used in most of the movies. Legacy.
Okay.
I want to say my own thoughts on the legacy of Panzer 38T. Now, without the Panzer 38T, would the Nazis still have invaded Poland and France if they'd been missing those 57 in Poland, 250 in France? Would Blitzkrieg have done as well without them? I think the answer to both is yes. With the Panzer 1s and 2s and a few 3s and 4s thrown around, they still would have achieved what they did. They probably would have taken maybe more losses. The difference, I feel, would have been in Russia, where without the extra 750 Panzer 38Ts, the Nazis, would they have invaded Russia? Probably, because let's face it, Hitler. As they would have had the same levels of success in Poland and France, meant that the perception of victory was still strong. So they thought, look, we kicked those guys' asses. Why wouldn't we get the same sort of outcome here? So the outcome would have been the same, probably earlier in coming, but with so when they went into Russia, they would have had greater losses in the Panzer 1s and 2s, which were much more comparable to the Russian tanks, and they would have had to rely on the numbers of on their Panzer 3s, which would have then blunted their advance because they were the main advancing tanks of the Russians. Yeah, too far. Well, that's my navel-gazing way of view of it.
It's an interesting counterfactual, and there's a few ways you can look at it. I think part of the issue is that if the Germans hadn't had the Czech production available, they might, because the great constraint on German tank production was that they just never had enough engines because they always lied to the Maybach factory about how many they'd need because no one wanted to admit it was going to be a long war. And if they hadn't had the Czech factories to call on, they might have actually diversified their engine manufacturing within Germany, and then they would have actually been in a much stronger position going forward. So it's certainly an interesting one. I definitely agree. The invasion of Poland, the Poles were screwed the minute the Russians invaded them from the other side.
Yeah, that didn't help.
And the invasion of France, I still, simply the fact that the elite German divisions were using the foreign tank is
they still only had 250 of them.
Yeah.
out of over 3,000 tanks.
Yeah,
going in.
but the divisions that actually made the enormous advances to make the single cut work were the ones that had the foreign tank, and I think that's worth paying some testament to. But yeah,
all right. But the more important aspects of
how are they in Girls and Panzer? That's the important one. Yeah.
The legacy of the Panzer 38T is they are the only Czech tank to appear in the anime. However, it's later converted into a Hetzer, which would be impossible in real life, needing to widen and lengthen the chassis. However,
and add the concrete blocks to balance the damn thing. Because
however, other Czech tanks did appear in the manga. All right. However, last night when I was playing World of Tanks with my friends, I thought,
where was my invite?
Friday night standing invite, buddy. 10 o'clock.
Come on.
10 p.m.
standing. Sometimes it's later than 10, but anyway, go on.
Standing invites there. All right. That's what we do, or we just get with the program. All right. I thought to myself, as I was about to jump on and saying, I wonder if we can play the Panzer 38T. And I've gone on and seen that it's been retired from World of Tanks.
Oh, no.
Yes. The Tier 3 German tech tree, from the Tier 3 German tech tree. So basically, they've retired the Tiers 1, 2s, and certain Tier 3 tanks, but it's still in the Czech tech tree as the LT-38, obviously, is the Tier 3 light tank.
All right.
So, yeah, it was interesting because we all had everything. Oh, where'd all the Panzer 1s and where'd all the Tier 1s and 2s go? And they disappeared. There we go. Now, we're going to quick look at the check of the poll. Panzer 38T was underappreciated. 90% of people think that. Overrated, 10%. Ooh, somebody's on the out of there.
Yeah.
Out of 21 votes, that's a
lot of votes, actually.
That's a lot.
Hello, folks. It's Rob and John here from Totally Tanked, and we're joined today by Jack Bauscher, the author of the new released book of Forgotten Armour, Tank Warfare in India and Burma. Jack, how are you today?
Yeah, I'm very, very good. I mean, I imagine your winter there is probably warmer than it is here. It's raining and miserable, as you'd probably expect.
We're the bit of Australia no one knows about, where it gets sub-zero
cold.
for
Yeah,
6
Oh,
months.
really?
Yeah, no. I think we only got to -3 this week. It was all right.
Yeah, but we had a maximum of 9 degrees today. So
Yeah. Are you the
was
one
bright and
bit
sunny.
who can go skiing?
we can
Yeah.
see the snow on the mountains through winter. Yeah, we don't get it in the city so much, but we can see it. Yeah.
Now, Forgotten Armour in India and Burma. What can you tell us about that? How?
Well, yeah, essentially my book is a reassessment, in my opinion. This is something that I got into sort of sideways. I don't have a specific connection to India or Burma. Lots of people are into that particular theatre, certainly in this country. It's normally because they have a relative from there, whereas I've got into it really just out of curiosity, really. And the thing that always got me was the way that you'd read a thing about the Battle of Kohima, for example. They talk about the tennis court and how important it was, and the siege phase for the first 16 days, and then 23 days, with the second Dorsets, the sort of after the siege is broken, and then they have to battle over it to clear it. And then on the day that it's cleared is the first day they managed to get a tank there. And, books will just say, and then they finally cleared it on the 13th of May.
The glorious M3 Lees charging into battle, eh?
Yeah. So it's a grant on the tennis court, but it's the way that the books will just say, oh, and then a tank turned up and it was all done and it was fixed. And that's what brought me into it, because then I noticed that you see a similar thing at the Battle of Imphal, and then you get things like the way that 1945 is very much an armoured battle, and we can maybe talk about that a bit later. But it was the way that all of the books that exist just skip over it. The last time there was a book on this subject was in 1978. So I saw a gap. I wrote a dissertation on my master's on it, and then that became a book after speaking at a festival in the summer in this country last year. Sort of it snowballed from there, and here we are. Tank warfare in Burma.
Yeah, look,
Now,
we're very jealous of the history festivals that the UK has because there's nothing like it in Australia, really.
No. Well, you know, tonight you boys would love it. I've actually. Do you know we have ways of making you talk the podcast?
I'm very aware of the podcast. Yeah,
So
it's
well, what I've done, I emailed Al Murray last night because he saw an advanced copy of the book and he gave me a quote for the back. So one of the hosts,
very nice.
saying that recommending your YouTube and podcast because he'd love it. Because he does the model making and everything. He'd be right up. Right, this is right up his strata. But also James Holland wrote the foreword to the book as well. So he's given it his blessing.
Yeah, that's the absolute top of the tree in tank podcast. Well, history podcasting. I'm glad you've got time to talk to the likes of us.
No, don't be silly. Don't be silly. I love the fact as well that you guys are obviously over in Australia. It's fantastic to reach out there. One day I'd love to come out there and meet you guys, and also try and get myself one of those Lee Grants that are out in the desert. That would be dream.
Yeah, Oz Armour Fest up in Cairns, 2025. We're planning to attend, and
it won't be cold there.
We went in
nice and warm
2022,
there. No.
and it's right up there with in tank festivals. So just throwing that out there.
Yeah, I'll have to keep an eye out. I mean, I'm also a full-time teacher. I'm a head of history at a secondary school, so
it should be just before. It should be just before school goes back in the UK, so end of August.
Okay, so I'll keep that in mind for August next year. Fingers crossed I can get there.
Now, getting back to India and Burma, let's face it, they weren't getting the cream of the crop for tanks being sent over there by the Allies. The Japanese had very few tanks in the theatre when they could get them working. But the Allies obviously got all the good stuff seemed to go to Europe, and then anything that was left over that had been old or relegated or nobody else wanted anymore seemed to get sent to Burma and India. Now, is that a true estimation, or is it a case of strategic use for what armor they were going to be facing and the environment they were going to be in?
No, so it is exactly that. Burma is it's the second priority or the third priority, really.
I was going to say second, pushing it.
For the UK, sorry, I should say there, because it's sort of like the home front and Britain's sort of defence, and then it's the Mediterranean, and then it's Burma. Realistically, and for the wider Allied effort, it's even further down. As you say, for the wider effort, it's even further down. But it is something of a happy accident, really, because the beauty of the Lee and the Grant in particular, which is not the first tank out there. The Stuart tanks
and the Matilda twos.
Well, the Matildas don't actually fight in Burma at any point.
Oh, so I'm thinking of the Pacific.
Yeah. So they do fight in, and obviously Australian use in particular, and it's the Australian use of first Stuarts and then also Matildas in bunker busting. And this is actually the biggest influence that Australia has is actually, or Australian use of those tanks actually is a huge influence on the Burma campaign, because it's Australian troops that come up with this system of using tanks to get up within 30 yards of a bunker, hammer the aperture with armor-piercing shot to loosen the earth, then try some HE to then try and blow it apart. That's what's then sort of the lesson learned. There are British officers come over to New Guinea and so on to see what's going on there. They then take it back to India in 1943, and that's what's passed. So the second half of 1943, the 25th Dragoons in India then use these lessons learned from the Australians to then refine that method, and they do experiments with delayed action fuses and so on, so that the shell explodes a millisecond later. So it's inside on the back wall of the bunker, having been fired through it's broken through a few logs and then explodes inside the bunker. At which point it's either neutralized or it's completely neutralized, or it's suppressed enough for the infantry to do that final sort of moment. But that's why the Lee Grant is so perfect, because obviously the jungle is very, very close, although something I'll mention later is not all of Burma is jungle, and that's an important point we're going to make. The Grant has the perfect system of, and the Lee, both have the perfect system of close defense without limiting the amount of time it can spend engaging the bunkers in support of infantry. Because essentially what happens is the 75mm gun is very, very accurate. And also the 37mm can fire canister shot, and you've got a couple of machine guns. so you use the turret gun and the machine guns for defense, and the 75mm gun is used in offense, and you can do both at the same time. So you can have your turret, facing, over the right shoulder of the tank, engaging Japanese that are trying to close on it for a suicide attack, whilst the 75mm can still engage the bunkers in front of it. So it actually ends up being this happy accident, really, piece of serendipity. The perfect weapon happens to be what's given to the British troops at the right time in the right theatre. Obsolescence is relative.
You're almost making the argument for the AE Independent there, aren't you? Just have more turrets and then you can engage more enemies.
Yeah. And in close quarter fighting, that becomes really, really important. Although it's a double-edged sword as well, because, sorry, not double-edged sword, but like the close quarter fighting does overwhelm tanks. So do you know the Battle of Nunchigum? Heard of that?
Tell us about it.
No. So Nunchigum is it's like an upside down Y shape. At Imphal. It's about 5 miles from Imphal. So for those that don't know, the Battle of Imphal is when the Japanese try to invade India, hoping in the long run to get as far as they can to the Brahmaputra Valley, which is the river that goes all the way down to Calcutta and out into modern day Bay of Bengal through Bangladesh. And what happens there is the Japanese are trying to drive in, and Imphal is this big plain in the middle of the mountains, sort of 45 miles long, 25 miles wide. Imphal at the heart of it. And the Japanese need to capture this on the way to getting into the rest of India. And what Slim does is he withdraws all his troops from the mountains and jungles to the plain to fight on that plain, knowing he can use tanks, air power, and artillery much more effectively in that location. And because it's a plain, not mountains, he can quickly send units, like on the internal spokes of a wheel, much, much quicker than any Japanese effort to try and outflank anything. So he can send reinforcements to where it's needed and weaken quieter sectors at the same time. And obviously, tanks are a really big part of that. And they've developed all these bunker busting methods, the sort of 8-9 months before that. Sorry, go on.
And the Japanese probably don't have as much of an opportunity to infiltrate and get in behind the lines and exploit the weaker rear areas that they were so good at doing in the rest of Burma.
Yeah, absolutely, because there isn't the cover afforded them once they're at the plain. So they can do that in the mountains, but there is, at the end of the day, there is a limit to that. And at some point, they have to enter the plain to get there. Now, the defense holds really, really well. And so they, even when they do get somewhere, so they do get all the way around the west side of Imphal, so they do completely encircle it. They don't really manage to break onto the plain at any point. Anytime they enter the plain, that's normally where the Japanese advance is stopped. If it wasn't stopped in the hills before, for example, to the east of Imphal, the advance is stopped in the hills. But at Nunchigum, which is at the north, it's physically the closest the Japanese get to Imphal. Like I said, only 5 miles away, and it directly overlooks 2 of the airfields: the all-weather one actually at Imphal, and a smaller one at Kangla, which is a good weather, fair weather airfield. But both of them are bringing in supplies constantly. We're talking about thousands, hopefully over 1,000 tons a day they need to bring in by air. And so the Japanese capture this hill at Nunchigum. There's some fierce fighting. There is a VC won by an Indian soldier on the nights when they're first pushed off of it. And so they decide they're going to have to push back, and they decide to send some tanks up there. Now, Nunchigum is 1,000 feet off the valley floor. And its peak is actually 3,800 feet, but that's because the plain is 2,800 feet above sea level, and it's fairly steep, sort of 1 in 3 gradient. So again, that's steep, and it's a knife edge ridge. So when the tanks go up there, most of the Japanese bunkers are in the scrub, slit trenches on the 2 different sides of the knife edge. But then there are bunkers on a series of bumps along the hill. It's there's like a peak and then a saddle and then another peak further along. And that's where the bunkers are built. And the tanks go up there, and the drivers are having to the tank commanders on the very tall Lee tanks. These are Lee tanks. And they're having to be almost like their full torso is out of the commander's hatch because of the knife edge ridge. The angle of the climb, apart from when they're dipping into the saddle, but every time they're climbing, the driver cannot see any ground in front of him. All the driver can see is sky. So the tank commander is torso out looking down. But when they come into action, when they come to the Japanese positions, that driver is that tank commander is very, very vulnerable, and he's fighting, and they end up fighting off the Japanese attacks, both sort of suicide attacks and also rifle fire machine guns. They're throwing grenades. They're out there with Thompson submachine guns and even their pistols to fight off Japanese as they're coming close. But one by one, every single tank commander is killed. There's eight tanks go up, all but one of them loses their tank commander, and all the officers are gone. And the same has happened with the infantry from the 7th Dogras. They lose all their officers as well. So there's only non-commissioned officers left, and they have a bit of a discussion behind one of the tanks, and the tank commander that was commanding the artillery's observation officer, he's the last one there. He's the squadron sergeant major, and him and the Subar major for the Dogras, Ranbir Singh, and James Craddock is the squadron sergeant major. They're the ones that then finally finish it, and that's kind of a really important example of just how dangerous that close fighting is, the scrub either side of them, and the way that Japanese are shooting up at the tank commanders and so on, because they have to be so exposed in the difficult sort of terrain that they're crossing. In the modern day, the modern day Scots Dragoon Guards, the ancestor or the descendant regiment, they actually have a parade on the 13th of April when this battle took place. They have a whole thing with no officers. The squadron sergeant major leads the parade in their sort of memorial to sort of remember this date. I'm actually going to speak there next year, hopefully, on their anniversary, which would be nice at their place up in Edinburgh. But it's this fantastic small unit action and the quality of NCO training by 1944 that they managed to pull this off. And no one's ever heard of it. It's a fantastic thing.
Yeah, it's an amazing story, and I would argue that there's plenty of NCOs who would tell you that getting rid of the officers would be the best thing that could happen for them.
Well, yeah.
But at the same time, we interviewed a couple of years ago a young guy young American who'd commanded a T-55 in Syria for the Kurds. He'd come into the role because his commander had been sticking his head out of the hatch, and he was like, "Yeah, that was my lesson, to keep the hatch closed."
Yeah. I mean, it's the crazy thing that a big problem in Burma is the fact that it's actually really difficult to do that at times. I've got another example, and I've got the after action report actually here for it. So this is the 2nd of March 1945. A guy called Hubert Hornaby. He's a lieutenant leading a troop, and I think it's better actually. I'll read you the report, the after-action report, what happens to him. So he's another guy that's out of the thing. So this was part of my research, and I recount this in the book as well, using other sources, not just this report, to sort of round out the story. But anyway, so they crossed the Irrawaddy in 1945, and it's another. This is in a Lee tank as well. So you've got the separate turret and 75mm gunner, the large crew. So they'd halted and they were firing at a small chung, which is a dried up riverbed. While he was, so I'm quoting now. So while he was engaging in direct fire, a Japanese officer, since identified as a battery commander of the 5th Medium Artillery Regiment, and another Japanese at other rank, started climbing up the near side of the tank. They were not noticed by anyone until the officer was in the act of plunging his sword into Captain Cornaby. The Jap other rank was shot off by another tank's Browning fire, but the officer managed to kill not just Cornaby, but the 37mm gunner with his sword, and then either fell or deliberately got inside the turret of the tank. Trooper Jenkins, so a man called Vernon Jenkins, he was the 37mm loader, tried to prevent the Jap from getting into the tank by shooting at him with his pistol, but only succeeded in wounding him, and then had to fight hand to hand with him as his pistol was empty. During the struggle in the turret, he managed to pull the 37mm gunner's revolver out of his holster. Now, bearing in mind, he's dead or mortally wounded in the floor of the turret. Pulls the revolver out of the holster and succeeded in killing the Jap officer. The turret was jammed by the 3 bodies, so the 75mm gunner controlled the tank, which travelled then on under protection from the guns of other tanks.
Wow. That's close quarter fighting. Yeah. And it's possibly the only thing I've ever heard where the ammo capacity of the Webley revolver they would have been better off with M1911s. But that's the only time.
But I bet it didn't jam. I bet all the shots got off.
Yeah, I mean, it's the fact that as well he empties his revolver and has to grab someone else's to win that fight. He wins the military medal for that as well, the Vernon Jenkins, and the sword is in the museum at Edinburgh that I'm hoping to speak at next year. Well, think about it, it would have just clattered to the bottom of the turret, So and it's the same regiment that was at Nunchigum, although it's different soldiers, it's a different squadron. Just honestly, when I read that, I'd read it in another book, but it didn't go into detail. That wrongly said he'd been beheaded, and there is no evidence that the guy was beheaded. That sounds like soldier rumor expanded into that. And when I was at the National Archives in London and read that, I full on got like that hair standing on the back of my hands. Like there's an actual detailed after action report and everything. Incredible stuff. And this is one of the amazing things when you do this research. Sometimes you find something really, really original. This wasn't an unknown story, but the detail of it wasn't there. All that happened was he'd beheaded the guy and then he was killed. None of the fighting inside the turret was there. Yeah. Anyway, I feel like I'm getting too into detail ones. We're not talking enough about the general.
You were talking before about how most people don't realise that the actual advance into Burma by the Allies was very much an armoured advance. We saw a little bit of when we talked about the Churchills, how they were always just a day behind or 3 days behind the fighting before they could actually get into combat. But assuming all the other tanks had already leapt and bound forward through Burma, and with the Japanese retreating back to try and shorten up their own lines. Do you want to talk about that a bit?
Yeah. So I'll accept comment on this. However, I will argue that the Battle of Mekhtila in March 1945, February to March 1945, is the epitome of manoeuvre warfare in the Second World War. More than anything that happens on the Eastern Front, anything that happens in Northwest Europe, and so on. So bold claim. I will accept comment and debate on that. But here's my pitch for it. So the reason for Mekhtila is that it's not an obvious choice. It's sort of 80 miles from the Irrawaddy. So that's 80 miles of logistical support that you would normally, in a normal armoured thrust, you'd have to protect that road going back to the Irrawaddy and then over, that very wide river. It's well over a mile across for most of its length inside Burma, certainly in this central plain. And, I mentioned earlier, Burma is not just jungle. This is a part of Burma that is the central dry belt. It's red, sandy sort of soil. It is basically a desert. This is practically a desert. There is not much water in the area, so they do rely on, the villages have these special things called geels, which is basically where they store water in a giant community pond that has a big earth bank, sort of 6 feet high around it, that the Japanese often turned into defensive positions. They built their bunkers in the walls of these geels. But what this means is it's perfect for manoeuvre warfare. They're disused paddy rice fields, things like that. So it's easy for them to manoeuvre these tanks. But because the Allies have built up such effective aerial resupply, going back to Imphal, Kohima, Admin Box, they've perfected the art of dropping supplies into surrounded troops. So what they do is they just turn that into dropping them to advanced units. So when they cross the Irrawaddy, 2 brigades of the 17th Indian Infantry Division and 2 regiments of the 255th Indian Tank Brigade, they are going to charge across the Irrawaddy. They're going to ignore everything, charge straight for the town of Mekhtila, which is a supply hub. Most of the German forces are to the north, and they're congregating around Mandalay because that's the obvious place where you'd go to. It's basically the only place the British have heard of before they get to Burma, apart from maybe Rangoon. And the Japanese assume that Mandalay is going to be the target. But the British are going to attack, British and Indian Army are going to attack Mekhtila, capture it, cut the northern troops off, and then crush them between another attack on Mandalay, which is a feint, and they will crush them between Mekhtila and that. Because they've captured Mekhtila, the Japanese will have to respond, otherwise those troops are in the north, and then destroy them on the plain with their tanks, artillery, and air power. But the trick to it is they're going to not have this logistical tail and use that aerial resupply as they go. So as this these 3,000 vehicles, and a couple of tens of thousands of men are driving across this desert, or practical desert. They'll leave maybe a couple of battalions to hold somewhere, accept the next supply drop while the rest move on, and then they'll just catch up the next day or something. And so they completely have all of their resupply throughout this period by air. There is no land logistical link whatsoever. They completely overwhelm the Japanese, who are being reinforced. But and this is something I know you've touched on before. But the Japanese doctrine is you attack your enemy as soon as you can, because you want to try and catch them before they prepare for any sort of defense. The problem is that means the Japanese also feed their units in piecemeal. And once the British capture Mektila, which isn't an admin hub, so it takes 2 or 3 days. It's quite vicious fighting, but they do catch it quite quickly. What they do is they set up a series of defensive boxes all around, 6 of them. And what they're doing is every time the Japanese come near them, and they're using aerial reconnaissance, SOE units that are in the villages, local villagers sending messages, and armored car patrols. And every time the Japanese are approaching piecemeal, they just send out an armored sweep across the desert, and as the Japanese are coming up in lorries and things like that, and occasionally tanks, but there's probably only about 14 or 15 of them left in the whole of Burma at this point. The British send a whole regiment or at least a squadron. They've got priests, self-propelled guns, the tanks themselves, a few battalions of infantry, and then they're just catching the Japanese in the open. It's almost like some sort of cavalry charge by the American army over the plains against Native Americans, like that. And so they're sweeping into these places, and the Japanese are being destroyed in detail every time they pop up around the perimeter. And it's almost not a fair fight in a way. And it's down to this maneuver warfare concept.
Jack, just sorry to interrupt you there. Of extreme interest to our audience, I think here. You're talking about aerial resupply of armored units. So they were dropping fuel,
spares. They do some experiments in about 6 months before this. They do experiments of using 3 Dakotas to take disassembled Sherman tanks, but they just can't make it work because you'd have to have too many people at the forward airfield who would need to be defended, housed, and fed. So they theoretically can do it, but they don't want to leave so many people behind guarding the airfield because they'd need to spend a couple of days reassembling the tank. It's just not worth it.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's everything: fuel, ammunition, supplies. Most of it's being landed. They plan, apart from the first couple of days, they capture an airfield at a place called Thebutskon, which is about 2/3 of the way to Mektila. For the first few days, they rely on parachute drops, or the first week or so, on parachute drops of more basic stuff, and then heavier stuff comes in when they capture this airfield at Thebutskon. And once they've captured Mektila, which also has an airfield, they abandon Thebutskon, and then they just focus on Mektila. And again, the heavier lift can come in because they land the plane and unload it, often under fire as well. It should be said, I've contacted the Tank Museum in Dorset about this. The Type 95 Hargo they've got might be one that famously drove up the airfield and nobody attacked it at first because they thought it was a British tank until it was eventually some Gurkhas destroyed it with a Piat, but it might, or immobilized it with a Piat, but it might be from 1944 at Imphal as well. And there's rumors about which one it is.
Yeah, I mean, a Piat is overkill for a Hargo, really.
Yeah. But then again, the 37mm on the top of a Lee will do it. So 75mm and a Sherman as well.
Yeah.
Now, where can people get your book? Is on sale now, and tell us details.
Yeah, so Forgotten Armour, Tank Warfare. I have got one for you for your YouTube people. So yeah, Forgotten Armour, Tank Warfare in Burma. It came out on Monday in the UK, but it is available in Australia. You can get it from my publisher's website, so chiselbury.co.uk, and you'll find me on the author page or in the store. You'll find it on there. But it is also available on Amazon. Both of them will deliver to Australia. They'll take a little bit longer. I can't remember what the postal packaging will be, but we have already shipped there. There were people in Australia who had pre-ordered it who have already got a copy since it came out at the beginning of the week. So it got out quite quickly. They were posted in advance of the release date, so they have got out there already. So we do post to Australia. But yeah, I'm very lucky. James Holland, the historian, is a friend of mine. He has written the forward for it, and he's been very kind to me. I mean, his quote on the front is superbly researched and compellingly told. It is in his style. It's not an academic book. I want to tell these eyewitness accounts. But the basic premise of the book is the Burma campaign needs to be reassessed. We all think of infantry slogging through jungle, and lots of people think about the Chindits. This isn't being disrespectful about any of that. But I think the main thing is that the fighting in the jungle is a means to an end, because Slim wants to fight on plains. The Battle of the Admin Box is fought on dry paddy field, not inside the jungles where they can avoid it. In File, he withdraws to a plain. Kohima is mountain fighting rather than jungle. It's not really jungle up there. And 1945, the one that really breaks the Japanese army, finally, they're broken in 1944 at Imphal and Kohima, but they are wiped out essentially in 1945. They're crippled in 1944, but they're wiped out in 1945. This book charts that story and that reassessment that the jungle is just about getting onto those plains and out of the jungle, because the British and Indian Army's advantage is in armour, artillery and air power. Jungle is not the best place for that. So you build your entire doctrine and strategy around getting to the open spaces.
Yeah, it's Slim is it's hard to even say he's underrated now, because so many people have looked at it and said actually Slim was a superb general. But obviously Burma, like you've forgotten Armas, the title of your book, hasn't had the attention that it probably deserves. I do always love, there was a line of Slim's, if I remember it correctly, which is that if the enemy's attacking our rear, we've got them outflanked. Which is a flexibility of thinking that the British in the first half of the Second World War got stuffed around many times by not thinking flexibly like that. Yeah.
Well, that's why that aerial resupply is so important. 1942, the reason why the retreat in Burma goes so badly is because, and you mentioned this earlier about Japanese infiltration, because they get behind the British and Indian Army. Their doctrine is reopen that supply road. So when you've got air power, you don't need that supply road. And what you do is, because the Japanese gambled on capturing British and Indian supplies to feed their own advances, and literally fuel their own advances as well. And they used in the second half of the 1942 retreat, the Japanese have used lorries that they brought over from Singapore as well to move quickly. So they need petrol from British and Indian units that they've surrounded. But what that means is that if you use your aerial resupply, you deny those supplies to the Japanese as well. So they will get more and more desperate in trying to attack your defensive boxes, famously at the admin box in Imphal Kohima, and that they then break themselves in that desperation, because they can't survive if they don't. And at Kohima, 31st Division in particular is the one that suffers. Fergal Keane's book, Road of Bones, hints at that, because of just how, the Japanese soldiers just dying on the roadsides, in their thousands, retreating, the survivors dying because of that lack of supplies.
All right. Thank you very much, Jack. Any last words you'd like to say about the book before we let you go?
No, that's guys, thank you so much for having me on. And obviously, wonderful to speak to our cousins over in Australia as well. I've never had the chance to go, but I'm absolutely desperate to. I've had family that have lived out there, and my wife has been out there and things like that, but I'm the only one that doesn't seem to have done. So I'd love to come up and meet with you guys if I do get the chance.
Yeah, look, if you do make it to Australia, the War Memorial here in Canberra is definitely needs to be on your itinerary. So let us know. But yeah, Jack, good luck with the book, and I know you've already had a speaking gig at Bovington, which we're deeply jealous of, and we look forward to speaking to you again in the future if something comes up.
Yeah, of course. Let me know if there's anything you want me to comment on. Then obviously feel free to get in contact. I'd love to come on again.
Brilliant.
And we're back. Apologies for the weird interruption at the end of the last episode.
Very abrupt cut.
That was a camera overheat, but luckily we were largely at the end of the PZ38 T-bit. So.
However, some of you may not have heard the poll as we were going through it at the end of it.
Yes.
And it is changed. We're now underappreciated. The Panzer 38T, 91% and overrated 9%. We have another vote in there for 22 votes. So feel free to vote often, vote everywhere, and get your feelings made heard.
Yeah, but it's anyway. That's awesome. I think it's about right. And it's a hard one. You get these German commentators who are very fluent in English, but their idea of English, they think there are more rules in English than there actually are. And
I think I articulated it very well, saying like English does not have a lot of rules and how
it's a living language. All right, so Rob, we are up to beer review time, and we are currently drinking a Hefeweizen you bought us.
Yes, it's German. So we started out with a Czech beer tonight, and now we're going to the Hefeweizen. We're just going to finish this one up, and then we're going to go to another beer review beer. And what have we got, John?
We have the Beck's, which is one of the classic German lagers, and when we say classic lager, we don't normally mean anything that good. Beck's was the first beer in Australia that was sold in big kegs. Well, not big kegs, like 5-litre kegs you could take to a party. And that was my first.
That's right. Yeah, I remember those. Yeah. I remember we had a number of little kegs at your 50th last year.
Yeah, that was a bit of fun.
So we have the Bremen German, established 1873. So just after unification.
Yeah.
So they would have been German. Saying it's a 500ml can. It's 5% alcohol. Following the German purity laws, which John loves to tell us about.
I don't. I think they're bullshit. But,
It's got a key right on the can.
Yeah.
I'm not sure what the key stands for. Whether it is Beck's means key in German or...
Yeah. Look, I have particularly mixed feelings about this because when I lived in London when I was a very young man, I was madly in love with a girl called Rebecca who went by Beck's, and she always drank this beer because it was named after her. Anyway, nothing ever happened with that, but it was fun. Yes. Okay. All right. Jamie says book author interviews were available are great, and to that we say any book authors out there who want to be in the show, get in touch because we
love talking about tanks.
Yeah.
And as with Jack, the lovely one was it was actually 5 o'clock in the afternoon, so we could have a beer while we're doing it rather than 8 o'clock in the morning on a Saturday, which even we draw the line at. Mostly.
Well, depends.
All right. Now,
okay.
why have they got Philadelphia 1876 on the can as well as...
I have no idea. But
Bremen...
We've only got so long before the camera craps out from over here.
All right, so we better keep on talking.
We better keep trucking. Yeah. So we'll give you a beer review on the Beck's once we've tasted some of it. But, so one of the things, AI, there's a Wojak AI generator, and it's in the slideshow for those. But, it really nailed tank podcasters in terms of owning
I feel seen.
Tanks.
I feel seen.
Yeah.
All right, my people in the AI have seen me. So when the AI revolution comes, I will have a place.
Yeah.
All
Okay.
right?
Well, that's good.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. I think you got to embrace these things, John.
Now, the next thing on my list was just that there's some nasty NAFO person, and not all NAFO people are nasty, but has figured out the pace of a snail, which is like a 0.04 kilometers per hour, and tracked that against the Russian army's progress in Ukraine, and noted that the Russian army is moving much slower than a snail, which is. Well, it's just delightful and mean at the same time. It's just my favourite sort of mean.
But you got to think to yourself: is it a snail during winter or summer, or what sort of terrain?
It's just an average snail. It's an average snail's pace. Let's move on from that, though. Now,
can I? I'd just like to call out a lovely comment we got on the feedback saying how nice we were to listen to, and how we were more left-leaning than they expected, and I really enjoyed that one. That was a lovely comment.
Yeah, because we're not arseholes.
No, we like to talk about things as
take that as you will, folks.
In fact, my missus really enjoyed this. Said, send me that because that way. So when the revolution comes, we can say, well, we are not what most people might think of us. We are more left-leaning than we
Yeah. Anyway, let's move on. So the ACV, which is the US Marines' new armored personnel carrier, has deployed to Japan, which is important. It's essentially the same capability as the AAV, but they've gotten rid of the tracks and put wheels on it. And the problem with any of these Marine vehicles is that they insist on having unified 13-man squads or sections.
Yes.
And literally they could do that in 2 vehicles that would be cheaper, better vehicles. But because they insist on putting all the 13 guys into one vehicle, it creates problems for them. Anyway, it's got better mine protection, which is important.
I mean, these are ship-to-shore wheeled vehicles. So the 1940s Duck V, Duck U, whatever they're called, ducks. That they go around in the great big rubber tyres, but these ones have got better armour. And I've got to say, I would not like to be long at sea in a going ship to shore if there are drones around, because an FPV drone, seeing one of these when you're not high out of the water type thing, when you're going from 500 metres offshore onto the beach.
They're going to need some drone countermeasures going forward. I don't think they've done it. But anyway, this has been a project that's taken years too long and cost far too much money, but it's finally deployed, which is, I guess, a good thing, although we obviously are opposed to losing the tracks.
But yes, they deployed them to Okinawa in Japan, so any sort of situation that might be happening in the South China Sea type area, whereby the Americans need to get boots on the ground onto an isolated island that is interdicting, whereby some other country is interdicting shipping in narrow channels. It's a useful forward deployment, but
look, your problem with the Marine model, and lots of other countries, including Australia, have gone with it, is that by the time your enormous 40,000-ton LHD hoves into view from the coastline, that's a missile magnet. You've got to disgorge that, and they're talking about push. These vehicles are no faster than the previous model with the tracks through the water, and you need to be able to basically be disgorging the troops, maybe 100 nautical miles offshore, not within line of sight of the shore.
So, hovercraft?
Yeah.
Which is going back to the 90s.
Hovercraft or helicopters.
The problem with helicopters is you don't have mobility once you actually hit the shore.
Yeah,
the thing. So it's why, yes, you can transfer troops from ship to shore via helicopters, but once you get to shore, drop them off, they're then on foot. Yeah. Whereas with the ACV, once you've got them from ship to shore, you're then driving around in an armoured vehicle. So there's a difference in what's capabilities there. So, but I mean, the hovercraft, which going back to the 90s, very expensive.
Maybe some hydrofoils.
Yeah. That's going back to the 70s, isn't it?
Yeah.
Anyway.
Now, other news from Ukraine is apparently someone's created a thing called the Hawkeye, not to be confused with the Hawkeye, the Australian one, which is a...
And Disney IP lawyers will be coming to both of those guys.
Yeah. So the Hawkeye is a Humvee with a 105mm howitzer bolted onto it. And it's the weirdest thing to me because, I mean, admittedly, my father was at least trained. He didn't actually deploy because he got his legs broken in a car accident in Hong Kong. But trained to be on a Australian ship that was joining the gun line in Vietnam in the 1970s. And he was talking about, we can detect the trajectory of the incoming artillery rounds and be doing counter battery fire in real time. And even in the 1970s, with the training he was doing then, it was like there is no future for fixed artillery. You've got to fire a couple of rounds,
shoot and scoot,
be moving fast. So this thing is cool in that it does the moving, but in terms of the fact that every artillery general in the world just wants to set up and spend 15 hours putting camouflage netting around and setting up little folding tables to put their computers on. None of that's going to work in a high-intensity conflict.
No.
But this thing seems far too lightweight for continuous service as well. So there's a bit of...
I just like the design they came up with, the forward recoil or whatever of the gun.
Yeah,
so
it's not a recoilless rifle; it's a low recoil rifle.
Yeah, but the way it does is basically it projects the barrel forward, then fires the round, then pulls the barrel back, which is then taking the recoil rather than actually having the body of the gun shooting backwards, which is what usually happens, which means it's not suitable for a 4x4 vehicle to fire from. So they've got a 155 version of it mounted on a 6x6 as well. So it's pretty cunning artillery. But just remember, boys and girls, the word computer comes from artillery,
calculating artillery tables.
A group of people are calculating artillery targets, and they were computing those artillery targets, which became a computer. So that's where we get all that from. They're doing what I like is that they're doing their operational testing and evaluation in Ukraine, not Arizona. So they're saying, you know what? Rather than figuring out this stuff works, we're just going to send it over there and say, have at it. Let us know how it goes. Rather than saying, we're going to go through some proper evaluation testing and controls in Yuma, Arizona, and to see how it goes. So, they could actually get around to. So they're pushing this forward to Ukraine to see how they go, or the US could, get around to ramping up ammo production to provide the...
No, ammo production in the West is all lies. It's taking money and telling lies.
Yeah, but giving the rounds to the Ukrainians that they need, that the Russians and Iranians and Chinese and North Koreans are actually doing for the Russians, and providing, because that's just a weight of ammo. I mean, yes, you need replacement barrels every once in a while, but if you're protecting your artillery, having the ammo is more important than getting new capabilities.
Brett Parker has asked, where's the ammo stored? And obviously, you'd be lucky to get more than 15 rounds into a Humvee with the gun. And the answer is simply that by the time you fire your 2 rounds and run away, and you fire 2 rounds and run away,
8 rounds in a minute is what they can do.
Yeah,
so
but they're not going to if they hang around firing 8 rounds, they're going to die.
A minute's a pretty short time for getting 8 rounds off.
I reckon counter battery fire is going to get so good in the immediate
future.
What
I didn't see was whether or not the changed recall system decreases the range of the 105 guns. So I don't know, but something to play with, and maybe they'll learn something.
Yep. Okay, what are we up to next?
Russian jamming getting better.
Yeah, this is because I'm in this weird situation where I know a bit about electronic warfare, and I keep trying to tell people you need to pay attention to electronic warfare, and they're like, "What's that? Why would we?" But basically, the Russians in Ukraine have, it would appear, have countermeasured Javelin to the point that it's no longer useful. Which is quite a big deal, given that if not for Javelin, Ukraine would have disappeared in 2022. They're also jamming GPS, which is such an obvious thing. You'd think in any peer conflict, GPS would be useless. It was always going to be jammed.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, it was put out with the idea of we're the only ones with this technology, therefore we'll be able to use it, and nobody else will have to look at maps again, and we'll be able to get around places much better.
But
because we don't have to rely on maps.
But if we're only fighting non-sophisticated technological opponents, then that's not a problem. But literally World War II sophistication. Certainly the British in World War II would have been jamming GPS within months of a GPS-guided artillery shell arriving.
So what we're getting at here is that a lot of artillery these days is the position of the gun, the position of the target, and you can actually figure out as the round is being fired, rather than having to figure out where the round is going, you can actually you can just say, hit this point on the map.
Yeah, and little fins in the shell pop out. And,
guide. However, the Russians are now putting out GPS jamming electromagnetic spectrum.
Spoofing so that the stronger signal comes through, giving the bad data to the shell.
The point being is that it is this because we've come the West has become so reliant upon GPS artillery, saying, okay, I know where I am, I know where the target is, I'm just going to fire it off and not have to worry about it. I don't have to calculate anything, and let the round and make, as it's in flight, make the adjustments to actually land on target. They're jamming that, so whereby as it's getting close to the target, it then is veering off because it's lost its capabilities. So, who wants to make lots of money? Figure out a way to make non-GPS artilleries.
Already been done.
Hang on.
It's like a microchip that does the inertial guidance with little accelerometers in it.
Make the non-GPS ammo accurate whilst taking the meat bags out of the equation, because you can always get somebody to figure out where you are, where the target is, and what the charge and everything else for the artillery to work. But you want to take them out of the equation because it's much faster. So the US Army has been working on it since 2018. Oh, done it again.
Done it again.
And have probably figured out, but I bet they've figured it out, but they aren't telling anyone just yet, is my thoughts.
I've seen pictures of the inertial guidance chips. They've got them. All you have to do is tell it where it is right now, and then it can figure out from the acceleration of being blasted out of the tube and flying through the air quite accurately through dead reckoning, which dead reckoning has problems over long distances and long periods of time, but
high pressures, winds, everything else in between. But anyway,
you can feed these things in, but it's just been complacency that is why these weapons.
You've relied on these things for 40 years. Why would you change? I mean, it's very expensive to change. Yeah. Whereas,
but anyway, the Russians have clocked it, and it can be overcome, but they need to actually do the overcoming. Yes. And the new Indian light tank, Rob.
Yes, released very recently. Wow. That's 25 tons. I can't see it having a lot of armour, but it's got a 105 gun. It's out there to try and combat the T-15 Chinese tank deployed in the high regions of the Himalayas, making sure that they've got some armour up there. So I'm not sure it's going to be great for global stability to have more tank-on-tank action at places where nobody can see and nobody can talk about.
Yeah, look, the sooner India achieves real parity with China, and given the geographical barriers between them, that will give us some geopolitical stability, I think. India being significantly weaker than China is a dangerous point in time. And the Americans wanting to start a war just so they can stay on top is awful and terrible, and we need to get rid of that.
But the egos between the two countries, you got to factor that into the equation and say, well, is either one of them going to be willing to say, you know what, let's just back down again a little bit and just bring things back from the brink?
I hear what you're saying, but you don't want the Chinese to be overmatching India.
I get that, but when they're both going for an arms race and saying, I'm great and chosen by God, and no, I'm great and chosen by the people, which that's where things get. It's a pretty delicate political situation as well as militarily.
Now I'm gonna
and like the Berlin with the T-60s we're talking about, the M60s we're talking about the other week. Things can escalate significantly quickly and out of control that anybody would think of. So
yeah. Now there's an interesting point. I read an article just in the last week, and I didn't put it in the slideshow, but it's basically making the point that the reason why tank guns haven't gone past 120 millimeters, at least in the West, 125 in the Soviets, obviously.
Handle.
No. The point is the penetrators and the material properties of the penetrators. A 120 mil gun can get your penetrator up to the most effective speed of the penetrator, because if you send it out too fast, it'll just shatter on the outside of the tank. So it can't go far. There are top limits on the speed of the things.
Like the Flash.
Yeah. So your 120 millimeter gun is already taking your penetrator up to its maximum effective speed, and if you're using depleted uranium, that speed is lower. So for a depleted uranium round, a 105 gun is probably still hitting that maximum speed.
What happens with 125 mil rounds?
Well, it's the Russian ones, and they got smaller penetrators because of the autoloaders, which they at the time made sense, but they didn't realize it was going to limit them the way it has. So yeah, anyway, it's an interesting point that this is why there's so many new tanks with 105mm guns. I strongly suspect is that they can get the penetrator up to the effective speed, and that's all that actually matters.
I kind of feel it's because they got a lot of 105mm gun ammo lying around, saying, "Oh, what are we going to do with this?"
Yeah, but the Americans have just built a new 105mm tank, the Booker.
I'll say we've got a lot of 105mm rounds. What are we going to do with this? You don't see that happening with 155 rounds. There's a lot of use for those guys.
Yeah, well, they got none of them. Yeah.
Now. Thoughts, John, on the Becks?
It is a very tasty lager.
It is very tasty.
I can't take away from that. We've drunk a few beers this afternoon.
We started off with the Czechs. We finished with the Germans, just like the Panzer 38T. Yeah. Yep. I can't see anything exciting. I still wonder about the Philadelphia and organisations on the can and what relationship it had. Maybe Ben Franklin had.
The key. Franklin had the key. With
there you go.
The lightning.
New movie with Michael Douglas coming about Ben Franklin and his book about farting.
Yeah. Okay.
He's got a book. Ben Franklin wrote a book about farting.
No, he did. He was an eschatological kind of guy. He thoroughly enjoyed his time in Paris, as far as I can tell.
Sure. I'm looking forward to that movie.
Yeah. Anyway, I just want to quickly say good luck to all our American viewers as you watch the corpse versus the
criminal,
the con man. Yeah.
Criminal.
Yeah. But yeah, the stacked Supreme Court's made sure he can never go to prison. So yay!
All right,
well beyond the Tank Podcast.
So many words. Yeah, no, we won't get into it. Anyway, thank you all very much for watching and listening and putting up with us. Well, cheers to you all, and for those who've had to go to bed, have a good night's sleep. We certainly will. After the Wallabies whip the Welsh in the rugby again tonight, even though it's a poor teams both sides.
Yeah.
But anyway, we'll still enjoy the rugby.
All right, the camera's made it this far, so that's the important thing. And all right, we'll see you out, and we will be back in a month's time with an exciting new tank.
Take care.